construction makers.
So we got a comment on one of our videos recently, and he mentions the Herzberg's two-factor theory of motivation,
which I'd never heard of.
I hadn't heard of it either. And now it relates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
which I have heard of,
which I think a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Basically, Herzberg's theory just splits Maslow's hierarchy of needs in two, and essentially says that the bottom three of the pyramid being physical needs, shelter,
and relationships.
So food, shelter, relationships is effectively the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. That's in hygiene,
right?
Which effectively just sort of means upkeep. Let's say
maintenance.
Right. And then the other half being self-esteem and self-actualization. So your how those in your community perceive you, and then how you are
perceiving yourself.
Right. Yeah. And that side of it for Herzberg is motivation. These are the things that actually motivate people to do things.
Which I will quickly debate that, because if I'm hungry, that's more of a motivation for me.
I think okay, so it's not the same kind of motivation, right?
Okay.
So it's interesting.
It's like a luxury motivation almost, where I'm like, everything's fine, but like I'm just sad. So
yeah. Ennui is how it's described sometimes.
Ennui?
Yeah, you never heard ennui?
No.
It's like French for like you just feel off.
Okay.
Things feel bad.
Here we just call that anxiety and depression.
Yeah. But it's like a special version of that, though.
Oh, okay.
You'll know it when you feel it. When you feel the we.
When I feel the we. When I'm on the we.
When you're on the we.
Yeah.
All right. So I digress. Okay. So when we start to look at game design through this terminology, I think Herzberg's dividing line here between hygiene and motivation is kind of interesting, because you can sort of divide a game into things that you have to do in order to do the thing, and then actually doing the thing.
Right.
A great example being maybe the setup in Dominion, where you have to select the different piles of cards that are going to be part of the deck building experience in that time that you're playing it, and then after that, you're actually playing the game.
Yeah, it's anyone that's wanted to get together for a board game night, and you have to read all the rules, set up the game, and after 2 hours, then you decide, I don't actually want to play this game anymore.
Yeah.
It's that. That's the hygiene.
Yeah. I am a big, I'm against setup. I don't like a lot of setup, and Magic's probably a big influence on that. But like, it's interesting because Magic's setup happens outside of it.
Magic's got a lot of setup, but it's just not right then and there as you're ready to go and play the game.
But the setup itself is also strategical. Is part of what's interesting about it, right?
Yeah.
Like your deck building, that's the setup, and then you bring that deck with you and you're ready to play. Right. Which I think is a great separation of these things. But so then even like if we continue talking about, like, we'll stay in deck builder land for a minute.
Yeah.
When you're actually playing the game, I think this also still applies, because there are certain actions that you sort of have to take that leads to doing the thing that you ultimately want to do. And that would, those steps that you're taking might fall under hygiene. But I think in a deck builder specifically, drafting the cards, if that's the hygiene part of it, that's the upkeep, that's the busy work.
Yeah.
Maybe we just call it busy work from now on, because that's the term that we usually use.
And hygiene's just a really weird...
Hygiene is just like a little
term.
too... I mean, look, this isn't specifically tailored for game design, so...
Right. Busy work is a very commonly used game design term.
So if we're looking at like the busy work of a deck builder, it's it's still compelling, right?
Yeah.
So doing the thing that gets you to do the thing is interesting, right? The thing being, my deck is working, right? So it's not that like the busy work has to be boring. That's not a necessity.
Right? I will say, in terms of a deck builder, though, like, at least I tried working on one for a fair amount of time.
Right.
For a good amount of time. Ended up playing a lot of deck builders.
Yeah.
And there is a constant that you can see in a lot of deck builders is that most of the time the drafting is the thing that you're doing. And that's that. I don't even know if that's necessarily the busy work. I actually think playing out the deck most of the time is the busy work, in that it's almost always automatic.
Oh, that's fair.
And I think a big part of that is because when you have these two things competing, they compete for attention, which makes one or both of them feel like busy work for the other one. And so a lot of the times there's usually a heavy amount of weight with either it's very, very heavy thinking, when you're worried about drafting, or it's a lot of thinking with what cards am I going to play. But usually it's more weighted one or the other.
Right. The deck builder will be designed in, okay, which side does this favor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe a good example of that is like the difference between, say, Star Realms and Dominion, right?
Right. We played Fort, too. I feel like Fort is not as big into drafting as it is like you can only play one card or you can only play a certain suit of cards, whereas most deck builders are like, you play your whole hand and blow everything up.
Right. Yeah. Which would be Star Realms or Dominion, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good contrast. So I think when we look at things in terms of like Magic the Gathering and we look at the busy work, right, of Magic and having it be separate from actually playing the game is nice.
Yeah.
But then if we look at the structures within playing Magic, where the busy work comes in, you might perceive things like needing to play lands as busy work. I think maybe this leads to some designers' inclination being to get rid of the lands because it feels like busy work. It feels like it's maybe not necessary.
Right.
And also you end up with things like mana screw. But we have a whole nother video about why
we do.
Mana is great. But
yeah.
So I think that I don't know how to talk about this without critiquing Commander again, but yeah.
Commander's bad. I don't know.
So let's talk about just like 60 card standard for a minute. In that, you have a deck of 60 cards. You can have up to 4 copies of each card in the deck, and you don't want any of those things to be inefficient, right? So the systems itself in that environment are removing some of these things that you would need to do to be able to do the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we contrast this with Commander, you have a 100-card deck, and you're not always going to be able to do the thing, first of all. But if you're optimizing to do one particular thing, then you're going to have to run a lot of tutor spells, for instance.
Right.
But you're like, okay, well, my deck does this one thing, and it works together with the Commander, but in order for me to get all the right cards at the right time, I'm going to have to get to those cards somehow.
And I'm sure that there are mathematicians out there that are much smarter and can actually do the math on the probability here. But I'm assuming that the reason... I mean, we even just checked, too. What are you looking at?
I have math.
Oh,
what do you need?
Well, when you look at the chances of you drawing into a card that you want in a 60-card format versus a 100-card format.
Okay. 60-card format.
It's happening live.
You have...
We're finding it out.
4 copies of each card. And so are we just talking about in your opening hand?
Sure.
Okay.
Or any individual card that you would draw.
So
being the card that you want.
Well, I mean, that changes.
Well,
based
that
on
changes
which
quite a
card
bit.
it is. So
Okay,
let's just
fine.
talk
Opening hand.
Let's talk
Opening
opening hands because it's more simple. So you have 4 copies of the card in a 60-card deck, and you're going to draw 7 cards, and you want to get one of them in your opening hand. You have a 39.9% chance of drawing that card.
Is that right?
Yeah. That is correct.
Okay. You better not get this wrong. Because it's going to be on the internet and people could just prove you wrong and comment about it.
That's right here. The math's right here.
I don't know how you're doing the equations.
There's a 60-card deck.
Okay.
The sample size, meaning how many cards you're drawing, is 7. You're drawing 7 cards.
Yeah.
You have 4 copies of each card in your deck, right? And you want 1 in your opening hand, right?
Yeah.
It comes to in my calculator that tells me what it is.
39%?
39.9%.
All right.
You have
So
about a 40% chance of drawing any one, if you have 4 copies of a card in your deck and you want to draw 1 in your opening hand, you're drawing 7 cards. You have a 40% chance of one of those cards in your hand being the one that you want, basically.
Right. One that is ideal for the plan that you're trying to execute. But in a 100-card deck, in a singleton format.
99-card deck.
99-card deck, yes.
And you're going to draw 7 cards still, but you only have 1 copy of that card in 99.
Right.
You have a 7% chance of drawing that card.
Right.
7.07 to be exact. We're talking a 40% chance of drawing any one individual card that you have a 4 of in your deck from your opening hand.
Right.
So to contrast with Commander, where you have a 7% chance.
Right.
So the structures and systems design of Commander, like having the restriction of, okay, well, you have 99 cards in your deck, and you can only have one copy of each, starts to necessitate, well, if I really want to be able to do the thing, the aspirational part of what I've built my deck to do, I have to play cards that help me get to that thing, right? Because I'm not, 7% chance, 7 in 100 games, I'm gonna draw the thing,
right. And so to bring this back to the Herzberg theory, this is kind of how we were talking about it, is that it's interesting that when a certain likelihood or probability of running into something, because when we play card games, we want our deck to do the thing. Ideally, we want our deck to do the thing. Right. In a singleton format, either you have to find multiple cards that are going to be serving a similar function, or you just end up having a tutor that is essentially going to act as that. And tutors are worthwhile in singleton format, not only because of the probability, but also because games tend to last a little bit longer. You can ramp up a little bit faster, so that extra mana cost isn't as big of a deal.
Well, there's space for inefficiencies when your opponents have other people to attack.
Right.
Yes. If you have the pressure of 1v1, your opponent is just getting further ahead.
Right.
There's not that time to lag behind and catch back up.
So it's interesting seeing how this sort of this extra added maintenance goes into a deck in order to actually fulfill like what it is that you are trying to do within your deck, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like if I would wager a guess, I think early on in the Commander format, the idea was to build your deck to do a lot of different things so that it doesn't really matter what individual cards you draw. They're going to overlap and do interesting things.
I think when you look at early precons, you even see that too.
I think part of the issue, though, is that like that is really limiting in the space of what Magic is able to accomplish in terms of like synergistic interactions within cards. So you have to start looking at cards as though like, well, this card is everything, right? This card is the enablement and the execution, right?
Which we've talked about, that's becoming seemingly a more and more common
like
thing.
A prevalent design strategy.
The amount of new cards that are coming out, the way I look at it is if it's split in 2 words or 2 chunks, and the top one is setup, and I look at the bottom one was like, oh, okay, it wants you to draw instants. Is the next thing gonna do something when you draw an instant? And it's like, and when you draw an instant, you draw a card. I'm like, okay.
We did it. Yeah. Yeah. It is a little, I don't know. To me, that sort of undercuts some of the best parts of Magic.
Yeah, I agree.
Unfortunately.
It feels powerful, but it's giving you the power, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's this, and we'll probably do a different video about this, but there's this dichotomy between decks that are quality decks and decks that are quantity decks. And really the split is, okay, well, in a quality deck, each of my I have individual cards in my deck that are very powerful, and and together they do something greater when they're combined. So the example, this is language that I'm taking from Paulo Vitor again, where he says that he talks about fairies. The fairy deck, Bitter Blossom is his example of a quality card, in that if I mulligan down to just having a Bitter Blossom in my hand, I can still win the game because Bitter Blossom does everything, right? Like it just gives you cards effectively and giving you 1/1 fairies every turn.
Okay.
So a quantity deck is something that's more like Mono Red Burn, where all of your cards in your deck essentially do 3 damage. That's sort of the idea.
Or try to get as close to doing 3 damage
well,
as you can.
in like modern, the modern format or whatever, right? So, so effectively, when you draw your hand of 7 cards, odds are it doesn't really matter what cards you drew. They all basically do the same thing.
Right.
So you're less likely to need to mulligan, but it's also much worse if you do have to mulligan, because now you're just down a card.
Right.
There's no other card to make that back up in quality. And a lot of decks are combinations of both of these things, but these are really like this is a good like stark contrast between these two things.
Yeah.
So where Commander comes in that situation is that when you have such low odds to draw any one individual card, it makes it really hard to draw two cards together that do something interesting.
Right.
Right. So you end up with individual cards that have to do everything.
Yeah.
And then we call that kitchen sink magic. I might cut that. I don't know if we call it that, but I call it that.
You call it kitchen sink magic.
Or was it bag of chips magic?
I think you and I talked about it, and I mistook you saying kitchen sink magic as kitchen table magic, and I was like, why do you not like kitchen table magic? Right. It's great. And then you had corrected
bag of chips.
Bag of chips.
We call that bag of chips magic.
I like everything bagel. I use
everything
that.
Bagel. Perfect.
Everything bagel.
I like that better.
Magic.
Okay, so let me do it one more time. One more take. We call that everything bagel magic. You say it.
I call this everything bagel magic. We should keep all this in. All this is fake.
It's so fake. So what's some conclusions here, I guess? What can we draw from this idea?
Basically, something that I agree with you that you said is that, like, when you are designing a deck for Magic, you are designing a game. It's what kind of had me start to fall back in love with trading card games. It's not just Magic. It was when I was getting into Digimon again. But the more I kind of got into deck creation again, the more I was already into game design. But I was like, oh, there's like so much crossover here. And it's so interesting. And so I think what's especially interesting is noticing when you are being forced to add in, I guess, inefficient aspects of your deck in order to try and reach a certain point.
I think what this kind of says to me is that, like, I wonder if tutor spells in general undercut the design philosophy of Commander, right? In that, if Commander is about embracing the variance that a 100-card singleton presents,
right,
99-card, whatever, tutors are effectively allowing you to play multiple copies of the same card. But then in the same instance, if you're playing multiple, like, there are cards that are just equivalencies of each other, so you can just have multiples of them. So,
I think it made sense back after the Legends set came out, after Commander or EDH was starting to become a thing, when, we had 2 tutor cards maybe? Maybe we had, like, Vampiric and Demonic Tutor or something. Yeah. And that was like a black exclusive thing that you could do. But now there's just so many different opportunities for you to be able to search for that exact card that you want.
Right. And I think it's interesting also to look at, like, where the format in its most optimal, like what it becomes. If we look at like a CEDH deck, they all have a very similar trajectory. I shouldn't say all of them. There are some outliers, but the most prevalent strategy is you play a bunch of tutors, you play a bunch of counters, you play a bunch of fast mana, and then you play a combo that wins you the game. And so the interactions of CEDH are interesting, but you're sort of like doing a bunch of this busy work stuff to get to the explosive...
Trying to do the combo.
Right, interaction of, I'm going to try to do the combo, are you countering it? It's almost like you play an entire game of CDH in one turn, right? Or of like regular Commander in one turn.
Right.
Where like, okay, well, over the course of the rest of the game, if you're playing like regular, Commander, I might play something, you counter it, and something else does this thing. Instead, we do it all in one turn.
You know what would be a fun test is just cut out all of those redundancies, all of those tutors, all those search cards in that. Yeah. Reduce the deck size back down to maybe even 60. Try to get that probability of what we're talking about closer to what it is in standard.
Yeah, I think we should do this.
And see if you still get that feeling, but quicker.
Yep.
And my assumption would be yes. And it's probably... I don't want to say it's better. We'd have to play it. It's a feel sort of a thing, obviously. But if that's what players are wanting to do... I feel like there are better opportunities to serve that. And now this episode's getting long.
Yeah.
I don't want this to sound like we're shitting on Commander necessarily. It's not like... Well, it's
not necessarily shitting on Commander.
It's not like we have anything against Commander. What ended up happening with this format is it... Look, guys, this got out of hand. Right? Like...
We need to talk about Commander. Good.
Like this format got super out of hand. I think that it was a casual format that ended up finally seeing some official support by Wizards, which understandably. And then if I were to assume, I doubt they expected this to be the primary format that people play.
Right.
And once you start officially supporting it and everyone starts doing it in standard and, tournament play, start seeing less and less things, you have to now support Commander. But how do you support this thing that was never officially really tested by the initial designers?
Well, it wasn't intended, right?
Its intentions,
The beginning systems of Magic did not intend for this expression, right?
Right. And so that made sense for a casual format. And it also made sense for the cards at that time. But as things started to be added in, and things, especially cards, started to be added in with that specific format in mind, we've talked a bit, I believe, about like Monarch, and we've talked about other things that are trying to work around, the problems of king making and Commander and stuff like that. But I feel like this is just another symptom of that, and it's not Commander's fault.
Right.
People are just playing the game.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of a runaway train.
Yeah.
Where nothing rotates. Everything's made up and the points don't matter. So.
Commander is the whose line is it anyway of television game shows.
Right. All right, so we come back around to the Herzberg's theory of you have motivation and you have upkeep, let's say. What are some sort of game design takeaways that we can have as we wrap this up here about things to look for? Because I don't think it's necessarily about removing all the inefficiencies in your game design, because there can be joy in those inefficiencies, like we say with like deck building, right? The busy work of building your deck is almost more important than the execution.
I think what it comes down to is that everything has to be done with intentionality.
Yeah.
And if that intention is, it may feel like busy work, but it leads to a feeling that almost makes up for that busy work, then I think that's fine. Yeah. I think a really great example of this actually is from Bullets and Teeth and Aliens. What? Okay. What?
Oh.
Whoa. When we were testing
game that's not out yet.
The game that's not out yet. Is that when we were testing it, like early on, you guys were trying to design the big weapon of the game.
Oh, yeah.
And there's all these different forms of it.
Yeah.
And then finally, you just showed up one week and you're like, it just destroys everything.
It just kills everything.
It just kills everything.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately what you're just trying to have it do anyway.
Right.
And so why not just have it kill everything?
Yep.
And that's the final weapon because it made the most sense.
Yeah. You just remove the busy work.
Right.
Yeah. Because all the other ones were things like, oh, well, you have to do some things and then it kills everything. And it's like, nah, why?
Right.
It just kills everything.
When that's all you want it to really do, and that's what you want it to accomplish in the game, that's the intention, so have it do the thing.
Yep.
And I feel like when you start designing like that, you really start to see the inefficiencies in your design.
Yep.